Hello Internet, Taliesin here. Quick introduction to this very unusual episode of the Weekly Reset. Our latest full episode of the Weekly Reset was all about pre-orders for Dragonflight and the latest possible release date that brought with it. Lots of discussion to be had, lots of hype to be hyped, lots of hopium to be injected full into our veins. Something you might not know though, before that news hit, there was a full other episode of the Weekly Reset written and recorded and mostly edited, all of which got thrown on the scrap heap of irrelevancy. And rightfully so, because there were pre-orders and release dates and hopium to talk about, right? What that means is for the last couple of days, I've been sitting on almost 20 minutes of almost finished Weekly Reset conversation, which it was definitely right to cut from a topical news show, but which some of you might be interested in its own right. So may I introduce to you two segments which were too hot for YouTube to handle, covering two pretty hot button topics at the moment. The difficulty of Sepulcher of the first ones, and it being the most nerfed raid in World of Warcraft history. Why is that? What does it mean? And Blizzard fostered toxicity in WoW, specifically in Mythic Plus, and how we fix that. And I know how to fix that. I basically fixed the entire thing. Don't worry, it's all good. In between those two segments, there was a whole bit about why is there no pre-purchase yet? Now we've mentioned it, they'll definitely bring it out. And 4.5 minutes ranting about Bobby Kotick and Activision Blizzard being so very, very evil, which I might bring out at some other time, I don't know. For now, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Weekly Reset, Unseen. Let's start with the reason I know you're all really here, the culmination of the epic race to world first, heroic, for guilds with a name a bit like Immortalis. And as you may recall, the last time we checked in on the brave, honest, would never heat up fish in the office microwave Immortalis Argent Dawn EU, yay! We had missed out on not only the title of champions, but also second place, and were left to scrap it out with old rivals Est Immortalis for that final podium and the bronze medal, which I think, if we're all really honest with ourselves, we have to agree is far superior to the gaudy and tacky gold and silver versions. It's just objectively a much better and more desirable medal to all true gamers, right? And the good news is, Internet, we did indeed finally kill the jailer on our very next raid night. Thanks in no part to a record-breaking performance from yours truly. I played as Shadow for the first few pulls, then got swapped to Discipline Priest and couldn't be bothered to hold everyone up while I went back to Ouroboros to change Covenant. So, even though my healing numbers were very bad, and I fell down a hole right as we killed Zoval, I did in fact rank world number 1 Necrolord, Discipline Priest for Heroic Jailer for damage, which is a pretty amazing achievement that I'm very proud of, and you can show your amazement at such a Herculean feat in the comments below. That's a natural reaction to such Chad play, I understand. Unfortunately for my guild though, it turns out that our jailer kill came literally like a few hours after Est Immortalis also killed him, meaning that they get the bronze medal, which honestly is a shit medal anyway, and we finish a very disappointing 4th place. The jailer really is the worst baddie of all time. Roll on Dragonflight. Oh, and congratulations to all the other Immortalis guilds, I guess. In all honesty, I have to admit, there has been a definite fatigue in my raid team in Sepulcher, which I don't think the raid really deserved. It's a really good raid, and a very hard raid. Or at least it was a very hard raid, as this week's latest round of nerfs, the 6th round of nerfs since release, means it is now the most nerfed raid in World of Warcraft history, which might sound a bit drastic until you consider that there's still only around 300 guilds on the entire planet that have killed Mythic Jailer. And yeah, that could be because WoW is a dead game and everyone's playing Lost Ark or whatever. There must be literally no one doing this raid for them to nerf it this hard. And honestly, yeah, that might be a factor. There's also the fact though that the power creep hasn't really been huge this tier. Double legendaries, 4 sets, and near BIS items were all obtainable very early on for those guilds who were willing to put the work into the massive amounts of split runs that are now just a standard part of the race to world first. Meaning that guilds progressing Mythic Sepulcher now aren't actually that much more powerful than those elite teams were when they took down the jailer in week 3, whereas in previous tiers they'd be relatively a lot more powerful by now. And that's kind of what we asked for. That's what a lack of time gating on the best gear results in, and opinions are, split in the community as to whether the solution here is to somehow disable split runs, or just not bother tuning raids around guilds that are able to split run at all. And you know, that's an interesting debate that I'm definitely just going to allow WoW Twitter to eat itself alive over while sitting here in this nice comfy chair away from any danger. I suspect the answer would be an ICC-style world buff that accumulates each week and just makes players stronger in the raid over time. It's a tough nut to crack, which is probably one reason why the debate has been going on for the last 18 years. But there's also no denying the fact that this raid is very difficult in a way that you can only nerf so much, because so much of the challenge of Sepulcher comes from the mechanics rather than the power levels that you need to beat these bosses. So you remember how with Kil'jaeden or Ashara, obviously you needed to be rocking good numbers, but really it was all down to an incredibly complex dance over 10 minutes long, full of one-shot mechanics that basically wiped the fight if a single member of the raid messed up. Well, it's not unreasonable to suggest that Sepulcher has 3 or possibly 4 Ashara fights in the Jailer, Anduin, Rygalon, and Halondrus. And that's not just on Mythic either. Anduin Heroic is basically a Mythic fight. Only 2 guilds in the world actually killed Heroic Anduin before the 4 separate nerfs that were administered to that fight over the course of the weekend following its release. And don't get me wrong, I loved progressing Kil'jaeden, I loved progressing Ashara, I loved progressing Anduin and the Jailer, but having 3 or 4 of them in one raid, probably because, you know, Shadowlands has a cut patch somewhere along the line, meaning that Sepulcher is probably kind of an amalgamation of 2 raids, which probably contains 2 final bosses in Anduin and the Jailer, and 2 the other hard boss of the raid in Halondrius and Rygalon. And I know Blizz swear blind that they definitely always planned for Shadowlands to only go as far as 9.2, but frankly, I don't believe them. To the extent that if Ian Hazakostis came round my house right now, looked me in the eye, and swore on the souls of his ancestors that they never cut a patch in Shadowlands, I'd be like, nah, Hazil lying ass. I don't buy that shit, sorry. I suppose if you really wanted some super hopium, which frankly I think we all kind of deserve right now, you could read these new nerfs as a sign of Blizz wanting everyone who desires cutting edge to attain cutting edge pronto, because season 4 is actually closer than you think. It's going to be late August at the earliest, I think. But the fact remains that a raid needing to be nerfed this hard probably isn't the best possible endorsement of the initial design of the instance, even though, like I say, I think it'll overall be remembered as a pretty good raid. And look, season 4 legit looks good fun, I'm into it, but I think we're all just so ready to buy our tickets and take our seats on the Dragonflight Express now, you know? Not even like having the expansion, just being able to talk about it in more solid terms with a release date and an alpha and more talent trees to test and give feedback on, and yes, even a pre-order. And up next, toxicity in World of Warcraft. It's something that's been a bit of a hot topic in the community recently, what with the new 9.25 social contract and new in-depth reporting tools. And it's something that we did touch on in the last episode, but purely in the context of the Horde and Alliance divide in WoW. And we really did only touch on it because the episode wasn't really about that. And a few comments on that video very fairly pointed out that when most players talk about how Blizz might foster toxicity in the game, it's not through any faction animosity, but rather in its more competitive gameplay modes, and in particular Mythic Plus, and in particular Mythic Plus Pugs, and in particular Mythic Plus Pugs in the 8 to 14 level bracket. And you know what? That is fair. And it's also fair to worry about how Dragonflight's new talent trees might inadvertently help magnify this toxicity, if, as suggested by the Druid and Death Knight prototypes that we have seen so far, interrupts our abilities that need to be specifically spec'd into rather than standard base abilities. And yeah, I think that's a reasonable concern. So much so, we've been talking about it on stream all this week. So allow me, if you will, to give you my, not streams, it's all mine, top 3 ways to completely remove toxicity from Mythic Plus, leaving the game mode a vibrant playground of blowjobs and strawberries that anyone would be happy to partake in. 1. Stop depleting keys. And this is something that the community in general seems to agree would do much to reduce toxicity in Mythic Plus pugs, and I'm not going to be a contrarian for the sake of it. If everyone agrees it would be a good idea, it's worth considering as an idea. Much toxicity between complete strangers in chat or comms comes from a frustration that someone else's poor play is costing you something, and removing the punishment of key depletion, perhaps removing the timer altogether and give the same reward for a 25-minute Spires plus 20 as you would for a 10-hour Spires plus 20 would also be worth a shout. I do see the attraction of a timer and a basic fail state for Blizzard in terms of their design philosophy for Mythic Plus, but a shift in emphasis towards a group of players overcoming a challenge rather than defeating a challenge might be a subtle but important shift in the mindset. It's the most popular and oft-quoted suggestion from the community. I don't disagree, it would probably make a big difference. But I think there are some other changes that could help even more. Timer or no? Number 2, more linear dungeon design. I get it, okay? One of the things people say makes a good Mythic Plus dungeon is the option to go different routes, pull different trash, come up with different shortcuts, which is then changed when a newer fix gives different options. It's one of those ideas that I absolutely agree is a good thing about Mythic Plus in principle, but never so much in practice. Because how does it really work in practice? The top players decide what the best route is for each dungeon at the beginning of the expansion, and then everyone else, especially in pugs, are expected to know and follow those routes. Then next season, maybe in a fix, changes things up a bit. 1% of the player base works out the new best routes, and everyone else has to learn that new one. There is no freedom or experimentation. If your pug tank goes off the established route, it doesn't matter if it's a good idea. It doesn't matter if it's better. Someone in your pug group is about to start shitting on them. I honestly think more linear style dungeons where the route is basically fixed and tanks can do bigger or smaller pulls depending on how sexy the group are feeling that day would be a real breath of fresh air at this stage. I also think it would result in a lot more tanks in Mythic Plus because learning and relearning the agreed upon standard route, skips and pull patterns for every dungeon, every season is not exactly rocket science, but definitely an added psychological pressure and barrier to entry. I genuinely think that the player base as a whole are going to enjoy Grimrail Depot in Season 4 a lot more than people are expecting for this exact reason. But I do also accept that this is going to be my most controversial take on this topic. I absolutely accept that there are plenty of players who genuinely value the scope to switch up routes and skips in dungeons, and I respect that. So hopefully my third idea will be a bit more universal. Interrupts. I think one of the main causes of frustration in Mythic Plus pug groups is interrupts, and players who have them not knowing the exact mobs and abilities that need to be kicked every dungeon to prevent massive shit shows. I think it's one of the reasons there's so much conversation around those new talent trees that we've seen that both require players to spec into interrupts. The idea that, hey, people aren't interrupting stuff properly now, this is going to make it even worse. And I think there are 2 ways that this could be dramatically improved. First, Blizz, just telegraph the abilities better, man. You design certain abilities and casts to be party wipers, so why not show that? When a dark shaman or whatever is casting the thing that kills everyone, make them glow red. Make a cast bar appear over their heads on the base UI. Add a voice line which is specifically associated with that cast. Let players realistically know what needs interrupting the first time they run a dungeon. Other big abilities are telegraphed with graphics and ground effects. Why are casts that need to be interrupted still treated like this deep, impenetrable mystery? And secondly, it is my firm belief that all interrupt abilities should include some form of reward for successful interrupts. And this already happens with some classes like Demon Hunter, but I say make it universal. If a successful interrupt awarded a few points of fury, or a combo point, or a charge of demonic core, then you'll see people being a lot more keen to use it. And yes, I accept it's quite likely that they'll always be using it, basically on cooldown, which means they would likely miss the important group wiping abilities. So yeah, okay, maybe just make it so the resource reward is given when you interrupt those clearly telegraphed special glowy voice line important abilities. Problem solved, I think. If interrupts are going to be an important part of Mythic Plus play, and I agree they should be, let's make it easier for lower tier and guildless players to pick up on that with better telegraphing and in-game encouragement to use the interrupts in the right places. That would be a major headache and therefore cause toxicity in pugs at least very much lessened, in my opinion. Sorry this episode is so late. I was ill in bed all weekend, shivering, and I genuinely have no idea why. It's kind of scary. Thank you for joining us today. If you like this video, don't thank us. Thank our patrons who still give their actual real life money to make all of our work possible. And guys, genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, because without you, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin Never Tell. Sorry, I got Penny in a little chair here watching me record this. My name is Taliesin from me and Evertel and Anirin and Penny too. Until next time, cheerio.